So what exactly do I mean by faux shadow? Well, really, a faux shadow is not an accurately projected shadow, as we've done before in other videos where we've learned to actually project and plot out shadows off of an object. A faux shadow is really kind of an imitation. It's something that we put in that implies a shadow, and it can also double as a vignette. So what I'm hoping to do here is really equip you guys with a lot of different tools that you can employ at different times, and it's all about what? The efficiency. Exactly. So that's the name of the game here, is giving you tools that will allow you to work faster and sketch more effectively. When you're using a vignette in your sketch, you want to be sure and keep it rather subtle. We're trying to create some contrast, but we don't want to go overboard and use very bold colors, things that will actually detract from your sketch or the concept. So you can see here in this particular demo, I'm using a very light blue. I'm trying to stay neat. I put a couple diagonal strokes in there. That's more or less a stylized technique that I use quite a bit. And so really the one vignette in this case encompasses or ties together 3 out of these 4 sketches. I'm not really concerned about the one in the lower right, other than just the very front end. And so you can see I'm putting on some marker now on that particular sketch, but I'm not going to do the whole body, just really the earpiece. So these techniques you've been introduced to already, but I wanted to go ahead and include, I mean, really as much sketching as we can do, the better, right? So I'd like to include some sketching in each video that I produce. We will be looking at, towards the end of this video, other examples of faux shadows and how we can implement them to help really punch out our sketches on the page. I hope you're noticing that I'm really working in layers, meaning I'm going around and slowly building up contrast for the shadow sides, for material change or texture change, and building it up, but also more importantly, working kind of rotationally around the sketch page, right? I'm not sticking on just one view and rendering that till it's finished. I'm building things up around, as I said, around the entire sketch page. Here I've decided to add a little bit of color, and at the end of the video I'll draw a comparison between this analog hand sketch and a scan that I did of this page, and then I rendered it in Autodesk Sketchbook digitally, and that opens up some further possibilities. We'll be getting to that maybe later in the semester or in a subsequent semester in a different course. Really, I'm just adding now a little hatch work, implying maybe a texture change on the back piece there. I'm going around, I'm beginning to add some line weight. Nothing really heavy. This is meant to be a simple, straightforward, fast sketch. And so I'm not really going to be pulling out a bunch of guides for this or anything like that. You did see the straight edge that I used, and I think I'll use it one more time just to tighten a few things up at the end, and also the circle guide that's used for the vignette itself, and just to kind of add a level of precision amidst the rough sketch itself. I say all the time, right, as designers, we are designing products for the manufactured world, and so when we're trying to sell our ideas, they need to have enough precision to be able to communicate the viability of your concept and exactly what your design intent is with the sketch, with that concept. So now Even on this rough sketch, I'm going to throw in some white Prismacolor to delineate the parts and add a little highlight. I think it just helps punch the sketch off the page a little bit better and distinguish between the parts. As I said, adding a little bit more contrast on recessed areas. And now I'm just trying to decide what final line work do I want. So I'm going to add, again with the straight edge, a little bit of darker line weight, and that will help really distinguish these particular sketches on the page. Because many times you'll have multiple, you might have a dozen different little concepts on one page, and not all of them are going to be worth highlighting, right? So you don't want to use vignettes or shadow to highlight concepts that you don't have confidence in. So I'm really only talking about, in this case, the faux shadows and vignettes being utilized to highlight what you believe are your best concepts on the page. In this example, I've actually gone back in with a little bit of two different blue Prismacolor pencils to kind of add a little dynamic flair to the LEDs. And now I'm adding my notes. And again, I always like to emphasize the fact that your notes are not only informative for the viewer, but from an illustrative standpoint, they're visual graphic elements on the page. So I like to try to be very neat and organized. I keep my notes in the same orientation. I've been doing the lettering for years, so it's easy for me, but starting off, I even gave myself guidelines, right? And I would do the text within those guidelines. So I'll have to produce a video on architectural lettering, and maybe that would help many of you. So as I promised, I am including now a digital version of the same sketch. I took the original hand sketch, analog sketch, and scanned it and brought it into Sketchbook. And then I utilized a lot of different brushes, in particular watercolor brushes, which I thought gave this an interesting approach. I like experimenting a lot with that. And in fact, I had an inspiration sketch that was done by an automotive designer. And so I tried to break down his technique and apply it, in this case, to this tutorial and these earbuds. So I've put together a few examples here of what I refer to as faux shadows. And they're really simple geometric elliptical shapes meant to really highlight the object and punch it off the page. In this next example, there's some subtleties going on that I really kind of like. You see in that upper center circle, at first glance, it looks like a vignette that's kind of highlighting the first top two sketches. But upon further examination, you see the little arrows on either end of that circle, and so that's really indicating the rotation of that blade. So it's a dual purpose vignette, really. I also want to point out the reflection of the bottom main orthographic view of the knife, because that is another very subtle way of drawing attention to that particular sketch. So here are some additional examples of faux shadows combined with vignettes, different styles, different techniques. Some just line drawings, some just hatchwork. In this digital sketch, I actually utilized the broad tip marker to create a vignette that actually runs through the product, and then that in turn allows me to go back in and create highlights and shadow directly on top of that. So it's very subtle again. In this quick sketch, you can see hatchwork shadows and circular shadows. Same on this drawing with the sneaker. This sketch has a couple things going on that I wanted to point out. One is the use of faux shadows, both hatchwork and marker work. digitally. But in the top sketch, top right-hand sketch, you'll see that it's intended to be a light. And so I utilized and subtracted what would be the light beam, essentially, from that product. I took it out of the vignette, and therefore it reinforces the fact that, hey, it's a light. This product concept is intended to be something that floats in the water, and so I've added vignettes that actually have context, right? So you can kind of see the dripping water, you can see the blue color. Basically, it just implies a little bit or reinforces a little bit what the product does or the environment that it's used in. This is another technique where you can lay down a lot of color very loosely in broad brushstrokes. If you're working analog, you could use pastel. Otherwise, if you're working digitally, lay down a large, wide brushstroke of color, and then you can work the highlights and lowlights back and forth to pull the product out of that. And that way, it really doubles as a vignette as well. In this example, I'm showing a very monochromatic color scheme, even between the product concept sketch and the vignettes used, but mainly was just trying to emphasize the transparent nature of the lens on this ski goggle. So in this very last example, I'm showing layering of vignettes, and you can see how the blue circle vignettes are layered on top of the centralized gradated rectangular vignette going down the center of the drawing. And I just thought that was an interesting illustrative technique. That's really all it is. And you can also see that I utilize kind of that same trick of where in the lower sketch I subtracted the light beam or what would be the light beam from that flashlight out of the vignette, further enhancing the product's function.